Good evening. Just yesterday, over 900 pages of newly released documents were obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request, which details specifically how U.S.-funded, meaning American taxpayer-funded research was being conducted on various types of coronaviruses over at the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China. These documents shed new light on what was really happening over in Wuhan prior to the pandemic. And then also, besides these documents, we had the opportunity to sit down with Miss Natalie Winters, who is an investigative journalist over at the National Pulse, and we discussed the conflicts of interest surrounding the organization which was spearheading this coronavirus research, but then was also subsequently advising big tech giants like Facebook to censor people's discussion about it. Let's go through it all together. This is your daily Facts Matter update, and I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. And now let's begin today's discussion by talking about the origin of the virus. Just yesterday, over 900 pages of new materials were uncovered by The Intercept through their use of the FOIA system, which is the Freedom of Information Act request system. More specifically, these documents detail the work of an organization called the EcoHealth Alliance, which is an American-based health organization run by a man named Peter Daszak. And it shows how they used federal money, meaning American taxpayer dollars from you and me, to fund research into bad coronaviruses over at the Chinese lab. Now, it is the case that some of this information was previously already known. However, these new documents do shed more light on what was really happening behind the scenes. And among the more than 900 pages which were released, it includes 2 previously unpublished grant proposals, as well as project updates related to EcoHealth Alliance's research. Both of those grants, by the way, were paid for by the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, which is, of course, the department of the NIH run by Dr. Anthony Fauci. Now, one of these grants that was awarded to EcoHealth Alliance was titled Understanding the Risk of Bad Coronavirus Emergence, and it was in the amount of just under $666,000. And that particular grant, it outlined Peter Daszak's rather ambitious plan to, quote, investigate the ecology, evolutionary biology, and transmission dynamics of bad coronaviruses at the human-wildlife interface. The proposal then goes on to outline specifically how the EcoHealth Alliance is going to conduct this research. And as you're listening to it, remember once again that this is taxpayer-funded research, meaning that ultimately you and I are the ones paying for it. Here's specifically what it says, quote, we will conduct field studies in China to obtain high-quality samples from bats and identify, characterize, and isolate known and novel coronavirus. We will analyze the patterns of coronavirus transmission among bats and other wildlife and the risk of spillover to humans. Now, according to these grant proposals, the researchers, and in particular Mr. Peter Daszak, he was well aware of the potential dangers involved in a study like this, including during field work in China. In fact, the proposal clearly states that in regards to this research, quote, the work involves the highest risk of exposure to SARS or other coronaviruses while working in caves with high bat density overhead and the potential for fecal dust to be inhaled. There is also some risk of exposure to pathogens or physical injury while handling bats, civets, rodents, or other animals, their blood samples, or their excreta. Virus isolation may be a challenge. But regardless of these dangers, the proposal did ultimately get accepted. And in total, this bad coronavirus grant gave the EcoHealth Alliance a total of $3.1 million, including almost $600,000 that the Wuhan Institute of Virology used in part to both identify as well as alter bad coronaviruses likely to infect humans. For your reference, by the way, this grant was initially awarded for a 5-year period between the years of 2014 to 2019, and then the funding was subsequently renewed in 2019, but it was later suspended by the Trump administration in April of 2020. And so again, everything that we discussed was from a single grant that was paid out over the course of approximately 5 years. The second grant, which was exposed inside of this treasure trove of 900 pages worth of documents, it was titled Understanding Risk of Zoonotic Virus Emergence in Emergent Infectious Disease Hotspots of Southeast Asia. Now, this second proposal was in fact granted, and the money was awarded to EcoHealth Alliance in August of 2020, and this grant is still currently active. It actually extends all the way out to the year 2025. However, let's continue our discussion on what was happening prior to the year 2020, because even before the pandemic, many scientists were concerned about the potential dangers associated with the types of experiments that were being conducted over in China. Experiments that we now know were at least in part, funded by American tax dollars from your my tax dollars via grants from Dr. Fauci's National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Now, following the release of this treasure trove of documents, the best contextualization of these findings that I was able to find came from Dr. Richard Ebright, who is a molecular biologist over at Rutgers University, and he actually earned his PhD in molecular genetics from Harvard. And here's what he wrote in response to these new documents. The materials confirm the grant supported the construction in Wuhan of novel chimeric SARS-related coronaviruses that combined a spike gene from one coronavirus with genetic information from another coronavirus and confirmed the resulting viruses could infect human cells. Then, in terms of infecting human cells, he further summarized the types of experiments that they were running. The materials reveal that the resulting novel laboratory-generated SARS-related coronaviruses also could infect mice engineered to display human receptors on cells, or in other words, humanized mice. And then he said that for the first time, these documents reveal the fact that the resulting virus was more pathogenic than the original virus. Here's what it says. The materials further reveal, for the first time, that one of the resulting novel laboratory-generated SARS-related coronaviruses, one not been previously disclosed publicly, was more pathogenic to humanized mice than the starting virus from which it was constructed. And thus, not only was reasonably anticipated to exhibit enhanced pathogenicity, but indeed was demonstrated to exhibit enhanced pathogenicity. He then went on to further outline another novel finding from this 900-page treasure trove of documents. Here's what he said. The materials further reveal that the grants also supported the construction in Wuhan of novel chimeric MERS-related coronaviruses that combine spike genes from one MERS-related coronavirus with genetic information from another MERS-related coronavirus. And then, to sum it all up, he said that these newly released documents show that the assertions that were being publicly made by our government officials, at least in his estimation, they were not true. Here's what he said. The documents make it clear that the assertions by the NIH director, Francis Collins, and the NIAID director, Anthony Fauci, that the NIH did not support gain-of-function research or potential pandemic pathogen enhancement at the Wuhan Institute of Virology are untruthful. However, this story actually gets a lot deeper, because not only was Mr. Peter Daszak and his EcoHealth Alliance the ones who were filing for these grants and spearheading this research prior to the pandemic, but then after the pandemic actually started, they were one of the main organizations that were issuing official statements, which were then used by big tech giants like Facebook to censor the public's discussion about this topic. In fact, we had... Hello? Hey, Roman, it's me. Nah, I'm just kidding. I wanted to take a quick moment and introduce our sponsor for today's episode, which is an awesome company called AMAC, or AMAC, and it stands for the Association of Mature American Citizens. Now, I do consider myself a mature American citizen, but I'm about 19 years too young to join AMAC. However, if you or someone in your family is 50 years old or over, I would consider joining because they are essentially the conservative alternative to the AARP, and they offer three main benefits to their members. The first is the money-saving benefit because they partner with a ton of retailers across the country and offer you discounts on things like vitamins, insurance policies, and so on. The list is pretty long. I'll throw a link to it in the description box below. The second is that members get a subscription to their magazine. And even though I'm not a member, I have read their magazine, and it's filled with thought-provoking articles. Very good. I'd highly recommend it. And then the third benefit, which a lot of people say is their favorite, is that AMAC fights on Capitol Hill against what they're calling the socialist storm that's brewing in America. So again, I would highly recommend you check them out. It's not too expensive. It's only $16 per year, but it looks like the benefits outweigh the cost by a wide margin. Again, you can go over to amac.us/factsmatter or just click in the link in the description box below. And AMAC, thank you so much for sponsoring our episode. Now, Roman in the studio, back to you. Now, while I was traveling down in Texas, I had the unique opportunity to sit down with Miss Natalie Winters, who is an investigative journalist with the National Pulse. She's actually an expert on Chinese Communist Party subversion, and we had a chance to discuss her research into the EcoHealth Alliance. Take a look. So let's discuss this recent story that you broke regarding Google and the EcoHealth Alliance. Can you sort of set the stage for us, for the viewers at home that have no idea what's going on?
Sure. So I always say that COVID-19 was the Chinese Communist Party weapon of mass destruction, and Peter Daszak and EcoHealth Alliance were their weapon of mass distraction and really mass disinformation. So EcoHealth Alliance and Peter Daszak really have been the key drivers of the narrative that COVID-19 originated in a wet market in Wuhan, the so-called natural origins theory. Peter Daszak has a very long relationship with the Chinese Communist Party, really decades long. He's collaborated on research with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Shi Zhengli has labeled him as one of her, quote, longtime collaborators in videos that we unearthed at the National Pulse. But what's really interesting is that beyond the ties to the Chinese Communist Party that Peter Daszak has, he also has ties to big tech, which also, of course, has ties to the Chinese Communist Party. But what's really interesting is that Google, which of course was one of the, I would say, most heavy-handed censors of the so-called lab leak theory, are really linking the virus to the Chinese Communist Party. You saw that with one of your great documentaries on YouTube about the true origins of COVID-19. Well, Google had actually been funding research carried out by Peter Daszak and EcoHealth Alliance, and it's been going on for over a decade. But what I think the smoking gun is with that whole relationship is the fact that in 2016, a study that Peter Daszak conducted, it happened to do with bat viruses in China, specifically how wet markets, which is a phrase we like to hear a lot about now from the mainstream media with regards to the origins of COVID-19, that emerging infectious diseases and viruses could actually spill out of Chinese wet markets. So really that study, I would argue, kind of laid the groundwork for the fact-checking basis that Google used to delist and censor any individuals like ourselves who insisted, rightfully so I might add, that COVID-19 likely has ties to the Chinese Communist Party in the Wuhan lab.
Yeah. What would you tell someone who looks at this situation and then thinks, well, it makes sense that, you know, this is the guy that you task with fact-checking it because he's been researching it for so long, and then since that's the research he was doing, that's the natural conclusion that it came to. What would you tell somebody like that?
Well, I think there's two things on that. One, the World Health Organization, which is another entity that Peter Daszak served as a COVID-19 investigator at, along with the Lancet Journal, they were never forthright with the connections that Peter Daszak had to the Wuhan Institute of Virology and more broadly the Chinese Communist Party. It was only about a few weeks ago that the Lancet actually had to, what I would say is the equivalent of a retraction, where they forced Peter Daszak to put out a statement where he later disclosed his ties to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and it was only through reporting by outlets like ours and yours that we really kind of pieced together Peter Daszak's ties to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So the fact that they weren't forthright with it was a really big issue. But the other thing, and I think that frankly, that just reflects the very naive viewpoint of many, you know, high up people in American society, specifically in the scientific complex, much like Anthony Fauci and the National Institutes of Health, that they don't really understand that it's not very possible to work with the Chinese Communist Party and end up without some form of compromise, whether it's financial compromise, research compromise, or just the fact that, who knows, maybe they have your data, they have compromising information on you. And I think that that's really what you saw with Peter Daszak, and that is why he is such an emblematic figure of what I would say is a complete and total compromise of the American scientific establishment to the Chinese Communist Party, just because they want research grants and they want to be able to conduct risky research, and now we're seeing the damages of that, obviously, with COVID-19.
So okay, so if you're watching at home, so the premise, the main premise is that Google was funding the EcoHealth Alliance, which
Yes.
with Peter Daszak was doing this research, but then when COVID hit and people like us and you were looking into the potential that this had leaked from a lab, Google censored us, even though they're also the funders of similar types of research. That seems like a conflict of interest and a big, at least has the potential for a big cover-up.
A major conflict of interest, and frankly that's the same thing that we saw go on. I hope your viewers know the amazing line of questioning that Rand Paul delivered to Anthony Fauci when they were talking about the origins of COVID-19 and whether or not the NIH, which is of course funded by US taxpayer dollars, had ever worked with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And what you saw there with Fauci kind of dancing around trying to distance himself from the Wuhan lab, much like Google, much like these big tech firms, the ties between whether it's the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which is obviously just one lab in a very much broader network of Chinese Communist Party run labs, the ties are most definitely there. And I think it just begs the question in the first place as to why either a American corporation, or even worse, I would say, a taxpayer-funded branch of the American government is collaborating with the Chinese Communist Party in the first place, but let alone on dangerous research that has the potential to reach, in the words of the Wuhan Institute of Virology, an article that they deleted from their website in March 2021, manipulating viruses to reach, quote, epidemic strains of infection. So it's really mind-blowing.
Wow. And there's also, so before the interview, you were telling me there was a Hunter Biden connection here as well.
Yeah, get ready for your mind to be blown even more. But so Hunter Biden, he actually worked with what's called Rosemont Capital. It was an investment firm that he created in 2009 with, of course, John Kerry's stepson. That's Joe Biden's climate czar. And people may know this entity because it later partnered with the Chinese government to form BHR Partners, which was a $1.5 billion venture where you saw him partner with a lot of very, very deeply tied Chinese Communist Party entities. But one of the offshoots, which was called Rosemont Seneca Technology Partners, has since 2014 actually been really a cornerstone investor. So they were heavily involved in the Series A financing round of a firm called Metabiota. And what's really interesting about Metabiota is that, similar to Google, they've also funded research carried out by Peter Daszak and a ton of people from EcoHealth Alliance. But this takes it one step further, because a 2014 study where individuals from Metabiota are listed as researchers actually also lists Jung Lee, which is the notorious bat lady from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, who many people in the American media, even some mainstream media outlets, have pointed as playing likely a very, very important and prominent role in the creation of COVID-19. So to kind of summarize, Hunter Biden funded an entity that quite literally collaborated with the, I would say, most likely creator of COVID-19 that really, let's be frank, led to the ability for his father to get elected, how they capitalized on the pandemic and mail-in voting. So it really is an amazing story, but as someone who's done a lot of reporting on Hunter Biden and his hard drive, not a surprise.
Yeah. How far removed do you think Hunter Biden was from the final recipient of these funds? Is it so far removed that he probably had no idea about it?
Well, I think his bank account knew about it because he likely profited a ton, and people may remember that, Hunter Biden still has a 10% stake in that firm, so potentially he could still be profiting. And, part of me wants to say that Hunter Biden didn't really know what was going on a lot of the time because he was probably off on, binges doing drugs and whatnot. But he was actually the founder and the managing director of Rosemont Seneca Technology Partners. So I think at that point, when you really are a higher up, I hope you know what's going on at your company. So he really, I think, potentially could have played an instrumental role in at least choosing to back the organization. But I think that really the answer to that question, it's kind of hinting at something broader, which is that Hunter Biden is invested in so many Chinese Communist Party linked entities that he probably wouldn't even know it if it hit him in the face. Because really, whether it's Chinese state-run coal companies that are actually identified as People's Liberation collaborators, People's Liberation Army collaborators by the U.S. Department of Defense, or whether it's nuclear power plants, he's partnered with them. So really, Metabiota is just kind of the norm and really not the exception.
Now, if you would like to watch that full interview for yourself, I'll be posting it over at Epoch TV shortly. The link to Epoch TV will be right there at the top of the description box, and also the link to this 900-page treasure trove of documents will also be in the description box below this video for you to check out. And actually, I wanted to mention something in passing. This whole story, this story about the origin of the virus, where it really came from, it has really put a spotlight on a lot of people in this world. Specifically, in terms of the media, it has really separated the wheat from the chaff, at least in my opinion. Because for the last year and a half, we here at the Epoch Times, we have continued to follow the evidence, we've continued to follow the facts, and we have reported them to you as they are, as at least we see them. In fact, last year, we published an awesome documentary called Tracking Down the Origin of the Wuhan Coronavirus. That documentary, it was awesome, it was fact-based, it did not jump to conclusions, and instead it laid out the evidence and allowed you to make up your own mind as to what you believe. However, because of that documentary, we were called conspiracy theorists, we were called far-right, and we were called whatever other names that they used. In fact, certain companies stopped doing business with us because they said that we were pushing conspiracy theories, which were labeled conspiracy theories by the independent fact-checkers. However, our reporting has been vindicated because we allowed the facts to guide us. We didn't dismiss objective reality in order to fit some kind of pre-approved political narrative, and instead, we reported things as we actually saw them. There is a great German saying that's usually attributed to Immanuel Kant, although I don't think he's the one that said it, and here's how it goes. If the truth shall kill them, let them die. And I think that quote encapsulates the proper way that a news organization should operate. A news organization should search for the facts, report things as accurately as possible, provide the sources as transparently as possible, and then let the reader or the viewer decide. And then if someone else has a problem with the facts or the truth, well, that's their own business. And so we here at the Epoch Times, we will continue to follow the story of the origin of the coronavirus, both by continuing to search for the mysterious pangolin, but more realistically by continuing to research into what was really happening at this Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, if you would like to watch our documentary, the one that's titled Tracking Down the Origin of the Wuhan Coronavirus, you can find it over on Epoch TV, alongside all of our other awesome documentaries, including a new series that we're publishing called The Dark Origins of Communism, wherein we trace the true theoretical underpinnings of this ideology and how its tentacles have reached into almost every facet of our society here in America, as well as almost every society on Earth. I'll throw a link to Epoch TV into the top of the description box. I hope you click on it. I hope you check it out. I hope you subscribe to it and join us on this journey of exploring this beautiful, beautiful world through honest journalism that is based in truth and tradition. Now, lastly, if you haven't already, smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe to this YouTube channel if you haven't already, in order to get this type of honest news content delivered directly into your YouTube feed while YouTube still allows it. Also, smash that notification bell so you can actually be notified of any new videos as we publish them. Lastly, if you have an Instagram account, consider following me at Epoch Times Roman. I publish behind-the-scenes research as well as spicy memes. And then until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed and stay free.